This is the Business Storytelling Show with Christoph Trapp. Name a top 20 storytelling podcast and a top 5% podcast globally. Christoph chats with thought leaders and experts to share tips and tricks that can help you tell your company's stories better to drive business results. Available wherever you listen to podcasts, live streamed on major social media channels, and part of the DB&A television network. Available on most U.S. television sets and streaming on Roku and Amazon Fire. Here's Christoph with today's episode. Let's go.
Let's go, business storytellers. Fist bump. Let's get today's episode going. Now, we want to talk about how do we create effective content by formula. And here's my little rant about that entire concept. And then I'll come back to the positive side. Back in the day when I was a journalist and we first started talking about writing by formula, filling in boxes, basically, right? This goes here, whatever on the website. People were fighting it, myself included. I'm a creative, blah, blah, blah. I don't want to write by formula. I want to let the juices flow, so to speak. And that's, of course, total baloney, because here's the reality. You know what journalists do? They follow a formula too, inverted pyramid style. Do you know what that is? It's writing by formula, period. But of course, I had to fight the man at the time, not just me, everybody else. But today, of course, I work as a marketer. I create content all day long. I create strategies. I update strategies. And you know what? Writing by formula doesn't hurt your creativity at all. In fact, it might help you because you have the guardrails. This is what I'm trying to do. This is what I'm trying to achieve. This is who I'm trying to reach. That's just my side of the story. Today's guest, Matthew Woodget. He is the co-founder at Go Narrative. He's returning to the show. He was on it way back when. And I'm always excited to get some of these experts back on the show. He's going to tell us his take on using a formula to tell your business stories and be successful. So let's get him out of the green room here. Matthew, good to see you again.
Great to see you. How's it going?
We need to get that in the jazz hands. Oh, I don't like that. That's why I do the fist bump. Give me a fist bump, Matthew. That's why I do the fist bump. I don't like how my hands look on screen. Yes, I am that high maintenance. So anyway, you were talking about creating content by formula, basically on Twitter. And I thought, hey, let's talk about that. I've done that before. I've actually seen a lot of success with it. But tell us about what do you mean when you say that and how does it look in real life?
Christoph, I love frameworks and guardrails, and I'm excited for everybody. Thanks for tuning in today, because hopefully you'll take something away from this, right? I love the idea of guardrails, right? My whole experience with creating content, whether it was creating code, I have a computer science degree, moved into marketing, wasn't a particularly good engineer. It's all about structure, right? The world is all about structure. One of my favorite analogies is music and art and art, like paintings, right? So music, you've got 12 notes on a scale. You've got, and then art-wise, you've got 5 primary colors. But just think of all the music. Think of the symphonies, the rock, the dance, right? From a music perspective. Think about all the paintings that have been painted in the world. And they're all constricted by these actually really small number of things in some cases. So that it's very much a misnomer that you can't have creativity because of structure. In fact, I think like your analogy there, love it, guardrails, it actually accelerates your ability to be creative. It helps you get over that initial kind of writer's block or creative block and just get going. So that's one big part of why I absolutely love formulas and structures and frameworks. So if you cut me, I actually bleed frameworks. So there we go.
So when we talk about structure, right? So when I think of structure, I think of it as, here's who I'm trying to reach. Here's like the key messages. And certainly I'm back in the day when I first started marketing, you know what they did? They said, well, we just have to repeat everything over and over and over. And maybe if you run an ad over and over and over, that works. But if you just say the same thing over and over and over as a marketer in content marketing, I mean, nobody's going to pay attention to that. You have to have different stories, right? But but what are the key, like, what are we trying to do? Like, what problem are we trying to solve? And then you always kind of get back to that somehow, the story. And then you can ask yourself, what does that story have to do with the problem that my potential customer has? Is that what you talk about when you talk about writing by formula, or how do you think about that?
So how I got into this whole business storytelling malarkey in the first place was I actually have a background in storytelling. I've written 2 science fiction novels, so still working to edit those. Career and family took over, but written 2 science fiction novels. I've kept a handwritten diary every day since 1990. And so big background from a storytelling perspective. And like I mentioned, computer science, right? These 2 things mashed up and resulted in, actually, while I was working at Microsoft and just about to leave Microsoft, getting tapped to be chief storyteller for one of the business divisions. And one of the first things I did was I channeled my sales buddy from Intel, Nick Drew, who had said to me once, always find if somebody's invented the wheel first. Don't go and invent a wheel if you can just find a wheel. So my reaction was, when I got hired to be chief storyteller, was go find the wheels to do this job. And Christoph, I was just blown away by the lack of frameworks for business storytelling. There's all this hero's journey stuff in 10, 12, 17 steps, right? But there was no simple frameworks. Some people had coaching around presentations or personal branding, but there was no real repeatable frameworks in business. And so I just kind of had to play this interpreter role for the next 5 years or whatever it was. And then eventually left Microsoft after a family tragedy that just kind of pushed me, forward, turning point in life, like life is short. And I established Go Narrative. And one of the first things I started doing in Go Narrative was taking all those ideas and all that information about business storytelling and putting it into some formulas. And so we've got a sort of handful of formulas that we use. And recently, in the application of some of those formulas, it really struck me that it was an opportunity to take one of those formulas to the next level. And so that's actually what you saw on Twitter. I was talking about that, and we use it for making notes of stories for our story bank, so that we can recall those and tell them ourselves, or that we can coach our clients to do the same when you're trying to come up with that story to open a keynote with, right? But it's also a really useful formula for case studies or case stories, something which has been abused. You and I have talked about this before, like they're just the boring page after page case study. So we've taken one of our formulas and we've taken it the extra mile to actually help you apply to any kind of story content. Case studies, it works particularly well.
Well, if you're trying to get me going on case studies, we're on the right track here. When they're done well, I'm a fan of them. Unfortunately, I have run across so many that are just horrible. They're just they're horribly written. They're horribly designed. Do not send me a 3-column anything. I'm on my iPhone, people. Seriously, you know what I mean? It's just not going to work for me. I should share a fun story when it comes to the iPhone. There was actually a company that their NPS score went down quite a bit because people had to scroll sideways on the iPhone to see all the numbers, and they couldn't see it. So only send me content I can read. Now, the tweet that you posted, I actually found it here. I wrote 12 mini case studies using one of our new prototype frameworks yesterday. And yesterday is in August. This new structure is killer. I love it. So are you saying, to an extent, that having a framework also helps you do more in less time? I mean, is that part of the deal?
Yeah, and that's why we create these frameworks. Any of the frameworks we've created in the first place is to A, make it easy to apply the methodology, B, to speed it up, right? And so if you speed things up, you can also get more done. And when I posted that tweet, I was blown away because I had this list of stories that we wanted to write, a couple fun ones. In fact, I can share one of those with you today. But they were kind of sitting on the back burner because it was just, the to-do list as long as your arm. And so I built this framework. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to go and try to apply it to this story bank that we've got. And it was just magical. I just burned through these at a rate of knots. And then we've got a process we follow after that to take that rudimentary structure and then go actually create content as well. So, but I also like what you said about case studies and content. And even if you're coming up with a big chunk of content, which has maybe got 3 columns, you have to think about all of the different media that you're going to put that through. And that turkey dinner that can be sliced in so many different ways, you have to start somewhere. And having a really good structure and being mindful and intentional about the structure of your storytelling will help you get to a place where when you reach out to Christoph with the content you want to share, you're able to put it into that format for the final mile in a way that is meaningful because it's based on a really great foundation.
I mean, definitely, I'm in agreement with that. And of course, that's kind of the model we follow here. The create once, publish everywhere. We do the live stream. Live stream goes everywhere, in case you guys didn't know, but the live stream goes to 8 channels today. Just on right now, 4 of them are mine, 4 are Matthew's. Restream has a really nice new feature that allows you to do that. And then, of course, we have the podcast. We'll write articles from that. And, so 100% in agreement. So how can we dive into the framework a little bit? Like what's involved? And I assume even if you tell us some things here, just because we know how to do it doesn't mean we know we actually can do it, right? I mean, I give people the example. I know how to play football, but I can't be Tom Brady. So it's the same thing, right? So you still need to practice. I'm sure you still need to try things and get into the habits. And I think getting into a habit, that's probably one of the biggest things I've learned when it comes to content. I'm in the habit of doing live streams. I'm in the habit of writing. I'm in the habit of doing whatever. And guess what? I'm just doing it. It's kind of what I do. So tell us about the formula. What's involved? How do people think about it?
Absolutely. And a habit is a basic framework, right? It's a time-based framework. It's very simple. It's like, I'm going to do this at every time on these certain days. So the framework that we developed here, it actually started because we have a framework called the 3D framework, which helps you see your story from all angles. It's the simplest storytelling framework on the planet. And I'm sorry, but beginning, middle, and end is useful for nobody, right? It's, oh, great, it's got a beginning. Oh, there's something in the middle. There's something at the end. That doesn't tell me how to do anything. So we created the 3D story framework to help with that. And it's really great to extract the details. So it stands for desire, difficulty, denouement. So what does somebody want? Your customer, for example. Difficulty, what stands in their way? And denouement, this wonderful French word, which is a metaphor as well, which is the untangling of the knot. So you can take that, you can start. I would encourage, if you're listening to the show, go tell a story today. What did you want? What stood in your way? How did you untangle the knot? And that untangling can be like, what were the outcomes? What were the conclusions? What process did you use? What products did you use? What services did you use, right? So very simple framework. But as we applied it to content, I realized it needed a little bit of something extra. And I was looking at a couple of different articles, and I came across this one from Randy Olson, and in his work with Park Howell. Randy had taken this idea from the South Park creators called and, but, therefore. Now, the beauty of and, but, therefore is it's this kind of action-oriented, forward motion sort of energy, right? This was happening, and this happened, and this happened, but then this, but there was this, but there was this, therefore this, right? So it's really great. But what do you fill in the gaps with, right? So it was the actual perfect marrying of the 3D framework with the ABT framework. And then I came across, recalled another very ancient framework, and that was Aristotle's Persuasion framework. So Aristotle had this framework, which is establish credibility, state the logic, engage emotionally, have a metaphor, be brief. And so when I looked at his framework, I was like, okay, so what is our relationship with that? And it's the emotion, it's the story. And so he took that and mashed it all up together, and effectively, and I can share my screen here. I can actually share the models, give a bit of a visual aid. Yeah. And so the way that it ends up coming together is, hopefully everybody should be able to see that soon, is it looks like this. So establish credibility and state the logic. And what is that desire? But difficulty, think of a metaphor when you've got this far through the process because you've got enough to go on. And therefore, denouement. So all of these things together struck me as being potentially magical. And that was that I then took and tested out on those 12 stories that we had. And it's really fun. You can actually, if I jump to the next, well, I've got an example here. Have you ever seen Long Way Round, the Ewan McGregor riding his motorcycle with his best buddy around the planet?
I have not.
So this is that story. It's so at a high level, an avid motorcyclist and famous actor. And so it's telling a bit of the background and stating the logic. If you want to ride bikes around the world, there's a bunch of stuff you have to deal with. And they love the open road. This is their desire. This is why they wanted to do it. But then there's difficulties along the way. The metaphor that works for this is like the holiday from hell meets a buddy movie. And the therefore denouement is relying on each other and all these wonderful people that they met along the way. And so you can take this formula, you can any story, and it prompts you to move through these steps where you have both the head, the heart, you have the guts of the story with the 3D framework, and you have that lovely forward motion that ABT represents. By the way, ABT was originally discovered by the creators of South Park, which I just thought was a brilliant little angle to this.
Absolutely. So, all right, let's untangle this a little bit more here, just to think about that for a second. So first of all, I like the advice. The beginning, middle, and end doesn't help anybody. And here's the reason why that really struck home with me is because, so we actually did an entire show, 30 minutes, about conclusions. And here's the reason why. Because most story conclusions in articles, on blog posts, whatever it might be, are horrible because people forget about them. So people aren't even following that model, right? The beginning, middle, and end, because we focus on the beginning because we think we need to pull people in, which we have to. And then everything is really the middle, and the end might be a half a sentence. So in your model, though, you talk about establishing credibility. And so I read the example as you had it up there, and it said a famous actor and something else. And so, of course, me, like immediately my journalist mind comes out and I go, what makes them famous? Like, I've never heard their name before. And I mean, I think people do that more and more, right? Everybody questions everything anymore. So how do we establish credibility quickly? How do we, like, so when you come on here, I say, so I'm immediately trying, at least, right? I'm trying to transfer my credibility with the audience to you, right? Because I'm saying, expert Matthew Woodget, and he's been back on the show, blah, 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 talk about the storytelling formula. That's one way to do it, certainly. But how do we do it when we're the storyteller and we need to establish credibility ourselves?
Yeah, it's very, one of the big risks with any business communication is the curse of knowledge, coined by Chip and Dan Heath in Made to Stick. And we spend so much time in our own businesses. We're experts in our own businesses, and we have to prove ourselves often, if we're in a corporation in particular, that we know our stuff. So it's very easy to let that slip out. It's very easy to focus on ourselves. Establishing credibility shouldn't focus on you, right? And you just gave a really good example of that. Talking about Matthew Woodget joining the show. It shouldn't be about you, but it should be about the transformation to which your product relates, or your service, or whatever the point of the story. And so we have a model called the TRIP storytelling model, which stands for transformation, reasons to believe, innovation, problems, and stories. And the transformation is about what change is happening. Is there a big change going on in the world? I mean, think about the transformation that we've all experienced with working over the past year because of the COVID situation, which is the reasons to believe. So the facts, the data, but also the aspiration, the end goal. What does somebody want to get by navigating through this transformation? And so establishing credibility is about effectively recognizing reality and pulling in just enough insight and information about what that big picture is to get people interested. And that's why I also mentioned that reasons to believe about the heart aspect, right? Aspiration, want, or need, because you need to recognize yourself in those opening parts of the story. Otherwise, you're not going to be interested, right? So the Ewan McGregor example, maybe you're interested in movies, maybe you're interested in motorcycling, maybe you're interested in traveling. We've got 3 significant audiences that we can get attention with there. And we've done it all in one paragraph.
So when you go through using a formula to write, so I've done that before actually. I had all the different pieces, not of the story, but the formula. Kind of similar to what you're talking about is, here's what I'm trying to talk about. Here's the pain point. Here's this. Here's that. And then I literally checked it off. Right? I said, okay, in there. That's in there. Is that how people are supposed to use that formula that you have? Like you need to go through and say, did I establish credibility? Check mark. Or meh, I got to big X, big red X. I need to work on that. Is that how people use it, or how did you implement it when you were doing your 12 case studies in I don't want to say no time, but less time than it used to be?
By filling in the boxes. That's why I love not just guardrails and formulas, but frameworks, right? So it's what do you put inside the framework? What goes on the frame of the house, right? The drywall on the inside or the siding on the outside, because you still need to put that stuff in, right? And so by filling that in, it's you're checking the box by doing it, and then when you've got the instructions next to you and you've got two tables, you've got one which is blank because you've got to fill it in, you got the other one which has got the instructions, a bit of prepping, a bit of guidance. By the way, that our last several blogs up on LinkedIn or on our gonarrative.com/blog go through how to implement this as well. Case studies, using them internally as well to persuade your colleagues to take them on a journey. And literally the last one we published this week, which is applying it to case studies. So fill in those buckets, fill in those cells, fill in those empty table cells, whatever you want to call them, and you'll be off to the races getting the content that you need as a first step.
So when you do that, how do you build in creativity? You know what I mean? And I actually personally, I think there is actually more creativity involved. I think sometimes when you have, we need one paragraph on this, one paragraph on that. And I still remember this was probably 21 years ago now. And I wrote this really good article for the Muscatine Journal in Muscatine, Iowa, a daily newspaper, comes out for the lunch hour, believe it or not, midday paper. And after the paper came out, one of the editors said, that was a good article, but you know what it was missing? I said, no, what was it missing? And she said, the nut graph. So the nut graph in journalism, and to an extent in content marketing too, you have the lead, and then you have a paragraph that tells you, why in the world do you need to care about this story? And it was missing that. Well, it was missing it because I didn't have buckets, right? Because, we did have buckets, but they were in our head. The lead, the nut graph, a quote. Now we go into whatever. So how does that look in this model? Do we just have a table? We have the stuff on one side, we fill out the other column, or how do we actually implement that?
Yeah, from a practical purpose, that's exactly what you do. Where does creativity come from? There's actually a lot of interesting research with neuroscience in terms of creativity isn't some type of talent. It's really a learned skill, and it's about information processing, and it's about reflecting on different types of information and connections between different types of information. So the more information you have, the more sort of raw material you have to be creative, and then you have to do the work. Right? Creativity is about doing the work. When I remember when I sat down to write my second science fiction novel, I planned the whole universe out for 3 novels, created all the characters, created the star drive technology, yada yada yada, right? And then I had the things to play with, and then once you've done that legwork, you can play with it. So your business, right? Anybody listening here today, your business. You could know your client's business really deeply as well if we're talking about a case study. And so understanding that detail, and then making sure that you're understanding how that fits into the world, because all those inputs are absolutely essential. And then when you've got those, and you take the time, and you give yourself the bandwidth, and you do the work, then you can get that creativity flowing. And of course, I'm also a big fan of saying that creativity really happens in the edit, going back and tweaking and changing and looking at what came at the end, making sure you've got the nut graph at the beginning. Sometimes you actually can't figure that out until you've written the whole thing, but all of that will help you move in the right direction. And you have to do the work.
So it's very true, right? Sometimes you can't think of the nut graph until you're done. But if there's nothing to prompt you other than some voice in my head that I need a nut graph, I might not think of writing one, right? Because there's no box to fill in. So that model, I think it's becoming more and more helpful. The last 2 minutes here. So Matthew, tell me, doing nonfiction, and I've written 4 books. I probably have a 5th one coming here in 2022, most likely. But I have no interest in doing nonfiction. But writing nonfiction, how can the skills that you learn there or that you use there, how can they help you in the business world?
Well, the planning, gathering great inputs, making sure that you're doing research, understanding the big picture that your subjects, your heroes, your customer are operating within, so that you can understand that landscape. This is called world building in fiction, and in business it's more like world understanding. And by doing that, understanding that landscape, understanding the characters who are in it, then picking up this type of framework is going to enable you to rapidly move through it whilst also applying the creativity that comes when you do the work.
So interesting, such interesting to think about it. Now, to me, it seems like a lot of companies are struggling with sharing their stories, their content strategy, because I mean, I've seen it work numerous times now. I think it takes a little bit to take off. It definitely takes work to maintain, right? Because you can't just stop. You still have to go back and do things. Do you agree with that? Why are companies struggling, and should they jump in, I guess?
I think a big part of it is tapping into the curse of knowledge, like Chip and Dan Heath's curse of knowledge. Is people feel like they need to know all the details, all the data, all the functional things about a business, all the numbers, and they don't leave enough space for thinking about the structures around how to get creative and using storytelling. Storytelling is the API that allows us to communicate and understand the world. And if you don't invest in that, your competition is going to eat your lunch.
Absolutely. Check out Matthew's company, gonarrative.com. That's the correct website, I hope. Matthew, it was great to have you back on the show. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge.
Fist bump. Thanks a lot, Christoph. Thanks everybody for.
That's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in. Please rate and review our show on your favorite podcast channels. And don't forget to share this episode with your networks. We appreciate you. Until next time, let the best stories win.